Have you ever looked at your life and thought, I need to start over? Not just change jobs or move cities, but completely erase who you were and become someone entirely different. In western Georgia, there's a man who did exactly that. But he didn't just change his life. He climbed to the top of a 131-foot limestone pillar and decided to never come down. His name is Maxim Kaftaradze. Former criminal, former drug dealer, former drunk, and today a monk who lives closer to heaven than any human being on earth. Every single day, he climbs a thin metal ladder bolted to the side of a vertical rock face. 20 minutes of pure exposure. One slip means certain death. And at the top, a church built 1,500 years ago. A tiny cottage. And absolute silence. But here's what nobody tells you. Maxim isn't the first person to live up there. When mountaineers finally reached the summit in 1944, they found something that sent chills down their spines. The skeleton of a monk who had been deceased for 600 years, still sitting, still waiting. And the question that haunts everyone who visits is simple. What could make a human being choose to live in complete isolation on top of a pillar for their entire life? What are they running from? Or what are they running toward? When you discover the truth behind the Katskhi Pillar, you'll understand that sometimes redemption requires removing yourself from the world completely. Sometimes the only way to find God is to climb where no one else can follow. Before we begin this journey, if you're fascinated by stories of extreme devotion, of men who sacrificed everything for faith, of places so isolated they seem to exist outside of time itself, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel because every week I explore sacred spaces that most people will never see, stories that challenge what you think is possible. This is not just history. This is transformation carved into stone. Now let's go back to the beginning, to a time when Georgia was part of the Byzantine Empire, to the year 940 AD, to a religious movement that seems almost impossible to believe. Imagine the 4th century. The Roman Empire is crumbling. Christianity is spreading like wildfire across the Mediterranean. And in the deserts of Syria, a man named Simeon has a radical idea. Simeon was a monk. But monasteries weren't isolated enough for him. He wanted total separation from the world. So he did something that had never been done before. He climbed to the top of a stone pillar, 15 feet high at first, then 20, then 30. Eventually, he lived on top of a pillar over 50 feet tall. For 37 years, Simeon never came down. He ate scraps of bread hoisted up by rope. He stood in prayer so long that his legs ulcerated and became infected. Pilgrims traveled from across the empire just to stand at the base and hear him preach. And when he finally passed away in 459 AD, something extraordinary happened. People didn't think he was insane. They thought he was a saint. They called him Simeon Stylites, from the Greek word stylos, meaning pillar. And suddenly, across the Christian world, other men started climbing pillars. Hundreds of them. They called themselves Stylites. The idea was simple but brutal. Remove every worldly distraction. No comfort, no company. No escape. Just you, God, in the sky. And one of those pillars was in Georgia. A natural limestone monolith rising 131 feet above a river valley. The locals called it Katskhi, the Pillar of Life. Sometime between the 6th and 10th centuries, Christian hermits looked at that impossible rock and thought, that's where I need to be. They carved footholds into the stone. They hauled building materials up by rope. And on that tiny summit, barely 1,600 square feet, they built a church, living quarters, a wine cellar. And they lived there for centuries. The first historical mention comes from Prince Vakushti, an 18th century Georgian scholar. He wrote, "There is a rock within the ravine standing like a pillar, considerably high. There is a small church on the top of the rock, but nobody is able to ascend it, nor know they how to do that." By the time he wrote those words, the knowledge of how to climb the pillar had been lost. The stylites were gone, the ladder had rotted away, and the church sat abandoned, unreachable, slowly crumbling in the wind. For 500 years, the Katskhi Pillar was shrouded in legend. Locals venerated it from a distance. They told stories about the monks who used to live there. But nobody knew if those stories were true. Then came July 1944. World War II was raging. But in Soviet Georgia, a different kind of mission was underway. A team led by Alexander Japaridze, a famous Georgian mountaineer, decided to finally solve the mystery. They brought climbing equipment, ropes, cameras, and after hours of difficult climbing, they reached the top. What they found was astonishing. The ruins of two churches, dating back to the 5th or 6th century. Cramped living cells barely big enough for a man to lie down. 8 large clay vessels called favres, used for storing wine, evidence of a wine cellar. And, in a small crypt beneath the main church, they found bones. Human bones. The skeleton of the last stylite who had lived and passed away on that pillar, probably sometime in the 15th century. He had been deceased for nearly 500 years. And he was still there, still guarding the summit. Japaridze's team took photographs. They documented everything. And then they climbed back down, leaving the bones where they had rested for half a millennium. The pillar fell silent again. For another 50 years it remained abandoned, a relic of a forgotten practice. A monument to an extinct form of faith. Until 1993. His name was Maxim Kaftaredze. Born in 1957 in Kiatura, a small mining town near the pillar. And he was, by his own admission, a disaster. He drank heavily, he made poor choices. He lived a chaotic, destructive life. Soviet Georgia in the 1980s was a place of moral collapse. Religion was suppressed. People filled the void with alcohol, crime, self-destruction. Maxim was no exception. When I was young, I drank heavily and made many poor choices, he later said. When I ended up in prison, it was time for a change. Prison. Rock bottom. The moment where you either give up completely or transform entirely. During Soviet times, Maxim had worked as a crane operator, so he wasn't afraid of heights. But he was terrified of himself. Terrified of the life he was living. Terrified that if he didn't change radically, he would end up lost or worse. And then the Soviet Union collapsed. 1991. Suddenly, after 70 years of state-enforced atheism, religion was legal again. Churches reopened, monasteries revived. People who had hidden their faith for decades could finally practice openly. Maxim looked at his life and made a decision. He would become a monk. But not just any monk. He would go to the one place where his past couldn't follow him. Where temptation couldn't reach him. Where he would be forced every single day to choose God over himself. He would climb the Katskhi Pillar, and he would never come down. I used to drink with friends in the hills around here and look up at this place, where land met sky, he said. We knew the monks had lived up there before, and I felt great respect for them. In 1993, at 36 years old, Maxim took his monastic vows. And he climbed. There was no ladder, he used ropes. Climbing equipment, it took hours. And when he reached the top, he found exactly what Japaridze had described 50 years earlier: ruins, crumbling walls, the skeleton still resting in the crypt. And nothing else, no shelter, no bed, no protection from the elements. For the first 2 years, Maxim slept inside an old refrigerator he had hauled up. It was the only thing that protected him from rain, wind, snow. Can you imagine? Every night, climbing into a fridge on top of a pillar, trying to sleep while the wind screamed around you. But Maxim stayed. Because for him, this wasn't punishment. This was salvation. Word spread, the monk on the pillar. People came from across Georgia to see him. Some thought he was holy. Some thought he was insane. But everyone was fascinated. Christian supporters began donating materials. Volunteers helped haul them up. Slowly, Maxim rebuilt the ancient Hermitage. The chapel of St. Maximus the Confessor was restored. A small cottage was constructed. The crypt was reinforced. A proper metal ladder was installed, bolted directly into the rock. By 2009, the Katskhi Pillar complex was complete. And Maxim settled into a routine that he has maintained for over 30 years. Every day he wakes before dawn. He prays. He reads scripture. He sits in silence looking out over the valley. Twice a week he climbs down the ladder. 20 minutes of careful descent, hands gripping rusted metal, feet finding holds on slippery rock. At the base, there's a small monastery, St. Simeon's Chapel. Other monks live there. And troubled men. Young men who, like Maxim, have hit rock bottom and are looking for a way out. Maxim counsels them. He knows what they're going through because he's been there. The shame. The guilt. The feeling that you've destroyed your life beyond repair, And then he climbs back up, back to his cottage, back to the silence. Food and supplies are sent up by winch. A simple pulley system. Everything except human beings goes up that way. If you want to reach the top, you have to climb. Now let's talk about the secrets hidden on that summit. Because the Katskhi Pillar holds mysteries that researchers are still trying to understand. In 2007, during restoration work, archaeologists made a discovery. A small limestone plate with an inscription in Esomtavruli, one of the ancient Georgian scripts. The inscription was paleographically dated to the 13th century. It read, "Georgi built 3 cells for monks at the top of the pillar to gain absolution for his sins." This was massive. It meant that as late as the 1200s, people were still building structures on the pillar. The stylite tradition was alive and thriving, but it also raised a question: who was Georgi? What were his sins that required him to fund monastic cells on top of an isolated pillar? We'll never know. His name survives. His crimes are lost to history. The inscription also refers to the pillar as the Pillar of Life, a name that locals have used for centuries. But why life? Before Christianity, the Katskhi Pillar was sacred to pagan Georgians. They venerated it as a symbol of the fertility god. Life, creation, the connection between earth and sky. When Christianity arrived, that symbolism transformed. The pillar became a symbol of the true cross, the ultimate connection between humanity and divinity, between earth and heaven. Another mystery, the wine cellar. 8 massive kvevras, traditional Georgian clay vessels. Each one could hold hundreds of liters of wine. Why would monks living in extreme asceticism need that much wine? The answer tells us something profound about Georgian Christianity. Wine isn't just alcohol, it's sacramental. It's the blood of Christ. It's central to every liturgy. Even on top of a pillar, even in total isolation, the monks celebrated communion. They made wine. They performed the Eucharist. They maintained the full ritual life of the church. This wasn't just hermits escaping the world. This was a functioning monastery in the sky. And then there's the crypt. The bones. When Japaridz's team found the skeleton in 1944, they didn't remove it. They documented it and left it in place. Those bones are still there, still resting in the crypt beneath the church of St. Maximus. Maxime knows they're there. He lives directly above them. Every day, he walks over the burial place of a man who made the same choice he did 600 years earlier. And Maxime has made a decision. When his time comes, he wants to be laid to rest in that same crypt, next to the unknown stylite. "Of course," he said when asked, as if there was no other option. As if it was the most natural thing in the world to be laid to rest on top of a pillar, unreachable, eternal. But here's what unsettles people. We don't know how the ancient stylite passed away. We don't know if he intended to remain on the pillar forever, or if he simply became too old or sick to climb down. Did he choose to stay? Or did he become trapped? And if Maxime becomes unable to climb, will he make the same choice? Will he stay on the pillar until the end, even if he could be rescued? He has never answered that question directly. The Katskhi Pillar has survived things that should have destroyed it. In 1421, during invasions that ravaged Georgia, attackers targeted the monastery at the base of the pillar. They burned buildings, they harmed monks, but they couldn't reach the top. The ladder had already been removed. The summit remained untouched. During the Ottoman invasions of the 5th–10th century, Georgia was devastated. Churches were destroyed, monasteries abandoned. Christian populations displaced or forced to convert. The Katskhi Pillar fell silent. The last stylite passed away. And for 500 years, nobody climbed it again. Then came Soviet rule. 1921 to 1991, 70 years of state atheism. Thousands of churches were demolished. Monks were imprisoned or faced severe consequences. Religion was systematically erased. But the Katskhi Pillar? It was unreachable, unclimbable. The Soviets couldn't destroy what they couldn't access. So it survived, alone, waiting. And in 2002, structural engineers made a terrifying discovery. The pillar itself was leaning, shifting from its vertical axis by nearly half a meter. If it collapsed, everything on top would be destroyed. The church, the cottage, the bones, Maxime himself. Emergency restoration began. The foundation was stabilized, the structures were reinforced. Coincidence or divine protection? There's something else. Something workers have reported but never officially documented. The temperature on top of the pillar is always the same. Exactly the same, no matter the season. No matter the weather. In summer, when the valley below bakes at 35 degrees Celsius, the summit remains cool. In winter, when snow covers the mountains, the summit never freezes. That's not natural. Exposed rock doesn't regulate temperature, but the Katskhi Pillar does. Some say it's the wind patterns. Others say it's the altitude. But nobody has a scientific explanation that fully accounts for it. Maxime just says, this is a holy place. God provides. Today, the Katskhi Pillar attracts thousands of visitors every year. Pilgrims, tourists, people searching for something they can't name. But in 2018, Patriarch Ilya II, the spiritual leader of the Georgian Orthodox Church, issued an edict. No more public access to the summit. Only monks can climb the ladder now. The decision was controversial. People protested. Tour operators complained. But the Patriarch was firm. This is a holy site, it must be preserved. The pillar is not a tourist attraction. So now, only Maxime and a handful of other monks are permitted to climb. And even they must have explicit permission each time. Women have never been allowed to climb. Not once in history. Saint Simeon Stylites, the first pillar saint, forbade women from ascending his pillar. And that tradition continues at Katskhi. It's not about worthiness. It's about maintaining the ancient rule. Preserving the tradition exactly as it was. At the base of the pillar, there's still plenty to see. Saint Simeon's Chapel is beautiful. Small, decorated with stunning frescoes. Open to all visitors. Inside, you can light a candle, you can pray, you can speak with the monks who live there, and you can look up. At the pillar. At the church balanced impossibly on top. At the tiny silhouette of Maxime, sometimes visible, standing at his favorite spot next to the church. The monks at the base follow a rigorous schedule. They pray for 7 hours every day, from 2 a.m. until sunrise. Then again throughout the day, and troubled men come to stay. People struggling with alcohol, addiction, men whose lives have fallen apart. They're given a bed, food, and a chance to rebuild. The only requirement, prayer. 7 hours a day. No excuses. One of those men was Irakli Kurashvili. Divorced at 22, lost, broken. He came to the monastery seeking help. And he found Maxime. Maxime has done so much for me, Irakli said. It is too late now for me to become a monk like Maxime, but I am considering becoming a priest. That's the real miracle of Katskhi. Not the pillar, not the impossible location, but the transformation it creates in people. Men arrive broken. They leave whole. So, after everything we've learned, let me ask you this. Was Maxime running from his past or toward his future? The answer is both. And that's what makes his story so powerful. He didn't climb the pillar to escape punishment. He climbed it to choose punishment. To force himself into a life so difficult, so isolated, that his old self couldn't survive. Every day he could climb down and never return. The ladder is right there. The world is waiting. But he doesn't, because he's not trapped, he's free from temptation. Free from distraction, free from the person he used to be. And maybe that's the lesson of the Katskhi Pillar. That sometimes real change requires extreme measures. That sometimes the only way to become who you meant to be is to remove yourself from who you were. Maxime is now in his late 60s. Every year the climb gets harder. His body aches. His hands shake slightly on the ladder. One day, he won't be able to climb anymore. And when that day comes, he's already made his choice. He will stay on the pillar. He will join the remains in the crypt. And 600 years from now, when someone finally climbs up again, they'll find him there. Still waiting, still guarding, still choosing heaven over earth. The Katskhi Pillar isn't just a church. It's a testament to the lengths humans will go for redemption, for transformation, for God. And if you've stayed with me until here, thank you. Truly, I know this was a long journey, but I hope you understand now why I had to tell this story completely. If this narrative moved you, if it made you think about what you would sacrifice for change, leave your like. Subscribe to the channel because next week, Leo will bring another sacred place that challenges everything you believe about faith and devotion. And share in the comments, could you do it? Could you climb that ladder knowing you might never come down? Or does the idea terrify you? Until the next story. Until the next pillar. Until we meet again in the places where earth meets sky, may you find your own path to redemption.